How are you all doing? Good. Okay, look at that light. Yeah, and point at it. Great. So, what just happened there is a bit of neurology. The signal took about 13 milliseconds to reach from your eyes to your visual cortex. It took about another 150 milliseconds to send a signal to your hand, another 150 milliseconds for it to go up. So you guys are all operating with neuroscience all the time, and you won't be surprised to learn that. Today, we're going to talk about how the environment can, and particularly light, can change the way people behave, the way their brains operate, and lay the groundwork for some of the great work that we're going to hear about next. So I'm not going to talk about daylight. So, we knew already, just a second, is that one? Yes. Have you heard about, so we knew already that we had, when I just gave you a command, a signal went from your eye to the center of your brain, the alerting system, and that sent a signal down your brainstem to send your arm out, right? So that's this non-visual system, and we'll talk a little bit more about it, because that also regulates your body clock. That's what sad lamps tickle this bit. This is the bit that drives your mood, your attention, your appetite, a whole bunch of other stuff. But we only discovered this stuff about 15 years ago, and we're still discovering more all the time. Until then, so the other thing that happened, so a signal went in there, and another set of signals went to your visual cortex, which is here at the back. And you've got two pathways which are running. One of them is the what pathway, like what the heck is that? And the other is the where pathway. Where is it? Yeah? And the two are negotiating all the time, and it's just an incredibly subtle and powerful thing. In fact, an Ethernet cable's worth of data is traveling down your brainstem all the time. And you've been doing this for a long time. See, you weren't very old when you started to learn how to do this stuff. In fact, you can see your eye starting to form here, and it starts within the first days of life. In fact, by the time you're born, this central section is more highly developed. The neural networks in that section are more highly developed than the visual section. And it seems as though that section there triggers the first breath in the newborn. So you are hardwired to respond to light. That is what triggers that. And as you grew, the response shifted from as anybody knows who's loves toddlers, it shifted from a me now, right now, into, as we grew older, into adolescence. We see this big shift from a very little of that, that's executive function at the front, to some really solid executive function here. And what happens if kids don't get enough light here is that this bit doesn't form, and it never forms properly. So we see an increase if we don't give them the right light and during the day to wake them up and enough darkness at night to let them sleep. This stuff doesn't happen. We see an increase in alcohol abuse, online abuse, sexual abuse, a whole bunch of stuff. It's a problem that you can't get back. As we get older, I'm not there yet, but you can see that these critical bits of the brain start to change, which is why it's so important to design where older people live in ways that actually support the way their brains are now working. So you see the red ones is where there's extra activity, so there's actually engorgement at the top of the brainstem, and there are bits which are stop working, which are actually perilously close to the visual cortex. So we start to see a change in visual function. Interestingly, we see some differences in the way that people with ADHD are wired also. So this is an ADHD connectivity, and this is a standard connectivity. And you can see what a difference that is, and how this is the visual cortex, these things here. Can you see how different that is, and how much more connectivity there is between the left and the right hemisphere, which is the way you balance sort of more logical thinking and more intuitive thinking, and language and behavior. So if you're thinking about designing for schools, understanding how these brains work makes such a difference to your ability to create spaces which are going to be appropriate and supportive for them. I'm not going to be talking about the way that light affects the way we see people, because that's something that I'm sure that the other lighting designer is going to talk about more. I'm going to just stick with this new mysterious bit in the middle. We now know, we can actually see the alerting response of light, lighting stuff up in real time. There's something called the salience network, which is like, oh, that's important. We see that happening in real time, particularly in response to sky blue wavelengths. Surprise, surprise. That is the signaling system which goes straight to the central nervous system here. It's actually better than a cup of coffee. They've been doing work on the space station, and low-grade coffee, regular doses, 90 milligrams, is fine. The problem is that it stops you sleeping. So they found that the blue-enriched 90 lux light has a similar effect, but it doesn't stop you sleeping. So having that combination and actually managing those intakes together is what you need. So you would think, oh, well, let's just pile a load of blue in there. But of course, that's not the answer either, because there's a diminishing return. There's a kind of a peak where performance, when we measure people's brains, measure outcomes, we see that there's a trade-off between comfort and attention, which sort of makes sense. If anybody's had an extra cup of coffee or a Coke to try and speed up, they will know that it starts to make you buzz. And that's exactly what's happening here. And what's great about working in this field now, which is why it's so exciting, is that we can wire people up and see that happening in real time. We couldn't do that before. It's fantastic. Yeah, gotta have a bit of that. So at the same time, we need to be aware that we also have a response to kind of cozy looking environments. I mean, this is a bit confusing here, but think about how much warmer it looks over there. You can actually think it's about 2 degrees warmer. There's something called the Hue heat effect. So you can use light and controls to flip from relaxing or energizing. And here they did some studies where they showed people a stressful movie, and they shifted the light just with the touch of a button and found that a bunch of alerting response signals went round down. We can also do that to help people to choose whether to confront or collaborate. We tend to step away from confrontation in warmer light. On the other hand, sometimes it's worth having a difficult conversation, in which case choose somewhere where it feels appropriate to be strong in that situation. Your brain actually needs both, not surprising. So we're seeing a growing number of schools, particularly in the States, adopting tunable lights, because we see differences in the way that kids' brains work when they're given the signal, this is time to focus and this is time to relax. But of course you knew that already. When we ask people in offices what the most important thing is to them about their environment, control of the lights consistently comes up top. So those are all acute effects. You can tell right now. And when I flash that torch, you could tell that there. But there are some longer term effects which turn out to really start to kick in after about 5 days in an environment, which is not surprising if you think that your body clock shifts by about an hour a day. We know that we can use light to set that body clock up in a very powerful, very kind of precise way. We can actually dial those knobs very, very specifically. And when we do that in a unit for premature babies, we see substantial stabilization of their melatonin and substantial reduction in hospital stay. Interestingly, they're eating the same amount, but they gain more weight when their metabolic rate is set up correctly. We see that in psychiatric wards, where schizophrenics particularly have a very sort of chaotic routine. And what we see is we lose all of that, we get it properly stabilized, and suicide ideation goes down. I'm doing a lot of work at the moment in residential healthcare and seeing some really beautiful results there. I'm just aware of the time, so I'll flip through. In shift work, we see something similar. And actually, if you want to design a space where people can work overnight comfortably, it's obviously not ideal, but we see some really substantial results here too. Interestingly, these kinds of approaches work in daytime active places too. So in offices, if you deliver enough of the melanopic lux, those wake-up wavelengths early enough in the day, we see the moment when you feel sleepy shifting forward and the quality of sleep shifting forward too. Sorry, the slide's gone all funny. But essentially what we're seeing now is, if we then fine-tune as the knowledge grows, actually having dynamic lighting through the course of the day enhances performance and a bunch of other metrics too. But of course, we all know, and you guys who are lighting designers know, that there are neurons, but there's emotion, and that's where the next, where real true lighting design comes in. Because you can, this is an interesting study where they basically set up different lighting design scenes and measured people's brains and also asked them what they felt about them. And they were able very clearly to predict the kinds of responses somebody would have to a particular type of design. So when people feel that the lighting in the space is good, they're more likely to feel they work for a great organisation, they're more likely to be engaged, and they even think other people are more competent around them, which is obviously going to be a good thing. So I'm going to finish with this, one of my favourite quotes. We shape our buildings, thereafter they shape us. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you.